Hey church, it's been really good to be reading through Mark's gospel with you and engaging beyond just preaching on Sunday and hearing your questions and being able to respond to them and hearing so many other people's responses to questions as well and some of the thoughts that have settled among our community. Last week, Professor Bowen had 11 questions from us about Mark 13, that strange chapter and that teaching of Jesus about the destruction of Jerusalem and about the coming day of the Lord. And so this week, the person who was going to be sharing with us was unable to, and I was asked to step in, which I'm happy to do, but also very happy that there are not 11 questions this week, there are 2, and so we can tackle them both and spend a little bit of time thinking about them. The first question is about verse 10, and it says, "Though not stated, what do you think was the tipping point, if there was one, for Judas to decide to betray Jesus?" And the person who asked this question is right. Mark doesn't state what the tipping point is, if there was one at all. But I think Mark does give us some clues, and these clues become a lot more apparent if we consider what Mark says in light of what some of the other gospel authors say. So, if we look right before Mark's account of Judas going to the chief priest, there's this story about Jesus being anointed at Bethany. And in this story, there is a complaint that some people say indignantly to one another, where they say, "Why waste this perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wage, and the money could have been given to the poor." And the people making this complaint rebuke the woman harshly. There's a similar story that's told in John's Gospel in chapter 12. And in John's Gospel, this complaint is not left to an anonymous few within the crowd. Rather, John points the finger explicitly to Judas. John says it's Judas who makes this complaint. And more than that, John says that Judas had actually been stealing from the disciples' treasury all along. That this complaint was not an indication of Judas's special concern for the poor or his personal piety, but that he was a person who was always very concerned about money, and money especially that he could gain and that he could control. So this lines up a little bit with what's happening here. There's a concern about money, and then Judas goes to betray Jesus, and he receives this promise of money in exchange for the betrayal. So money certainly seems to be a part of it, but as far as a turning point goes, other Gospels, and especially Luke in Luke 22, suggest that Satan enters Judas. And if we're looking for a turning point, that sounds like a turning point to me. Satan enters Judas, and it's from then on that Judas really joins the plot of the priests to kill Jesus. So I don't think that Satan would have been able to enter Judas and use Judas in this way if Judas wasn't already open to it, predisposed to it, perhaps tempted by it. And it certainly seems that money was a great temptation in Judas's life. Now, there are lots of other theories as well. As I was reading the Erdman's Bible Dictionary, it lists so many other hypotheses that exist out there about Judas's motivations. One is that Judas was trying to make Jesus into a political Messiah, that if he had to confront the Roman authorities, then he would have to do something finally, that Jesus would have to act and overthrow Rome. Of course, this was never what Jesus was going to do, and so perhaps Judas's betrayal was misguided zeal for that sort of zealous excitement for a restored kingdom of Jerusalem. The Erdman's Bible Dictionary also suggests that others think maybe Judas was becoming disenchanted with Jesus and desiring that some other person who better understood the messianic movement could come along and fulfill the desires of people's hearts to be the Messiah, that there was this groundswell of excitement for a Messiah in this time, and Jesus seemed like the guy, but maybe was increasingly seeming like not the guy to Judas, and so Judas figured, let's remove Jesus from the board so somebody else can do the thing that we realize needs doing. And then a third theory that Erdman suggests is a more recent one, that maybe Judas wasn't so much trying to betray Jesus as forcing Jesus' hand in actually talking with the Jewish authorities, that he might have thought if they talked with each other, if they had dialogue, if he handed over Jesus, Jesus would be able to defend and proclaim his identity as the Messiah. And this, of course, goes to the idea that Judas regretted what he did when he realized that he had caused Jesus' death. So maybe he wasn't thinking about death. So those last three are all just sort of theories that people have posited. But as far as what the Gospels tell us, money is a key part of it. Satan's work is a key part of it. And it seems in Mark's Gospel how he puts those two stories right beside each other. He seems to be giving a nod towards what John will later tell us in John's Gospel. Our second question begins thinking about verse 29, and it says, Peter says that he will never desert the Lord, but he is one of those who fall asleep in the garden, and he denies Christ 3 times. What is the Bible's purpose in bringing out so clearly the failures of Peter the rock? So why this focus on Peter? Maybe before we get to a purpose, there's a practical reason why. There are plenty of theories that Mark is telling Peter's account of the gospel because he wasn't there himself, but he is known to have been a friend and a contemporary of Peter. So maybe Mark has just heard Peter's telling of the story and has recorded it, and naturally, when Peter tells the story, he is a focal point of the story. He's experienced it firsthand. He remembers Jesus' words to him most acutely, and as he relays that to others, that's what's recorded by Mark. That's what's passed on through Mark's gospel. So that's maybe the practical reason why this focus on Peter. But I think there might be something else, because you're right, Peter's called the Rock. And if by showing Peter, who's later called the Prince of the Apostles, who Jesus nicknames the Rock and says, on this rock I will build my church, if this important figure, the leader of the 12, is seen in this way, and we're forced to recognize that even he denies Christ, even he falls asleep when he's asked to watch, if even he behaves in these ways, why do we think that we would behave any differently? Why do we expect that anyone else would not experience these same struggles? And I think this idea is bolstered by the image which is given to us in verse 51 and 52, where it says, after Jesus has been arrested, that a young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. And we might be wondering, well, what's that got to do with anything, really? But a commentary I was reading suggested that linen cloth and wearing a linen garment was a contemporary Greek image for bravery, for strength, for valiance and virtue. And it's like Mark is giving a nod to this idea and saying, even the brave flee. And when we think about it that way, it connects with a prophecy in Amos 2:16, which says, even the bravest warriors will flee naked on that day, declares the Lord. And so as far as a purpose, what's the purpose the Bible has in articulating the failures of Peter, the Rock? I think the purpose is to help us understand that if the Rock can be shaken by these events, if the Prince of the Apostles can seem to deny his faith, if even the strong and the brave, the valiant and the good, if even these will flee naked for fear in this story, then really why do we expect we would be very different at all? Perhaps that's what the Bible is trying to help us understand, that it's not that these were especially bad people, that their faith was too weak, but it's simply that this is the response of our sinful humanity in the face of unknown danger. And when the source of our faith is ripped from us, as Jesus was from these his friends, where are we to go but to run and to flee? So I think that's an idea we could sit with, maybe that you can sit with this week, as you are reminded again of the failures of Peter, to also remember the ways that we have failed in our faith, and the very good news that despite Peter's denial and his falling asleep, despite the strong and the brave fleeing, our hope is not in these, but is in Jesus, and Jesus is quick to forgive and quick to restore. So those are all the questions for this week. I hope that something stirred more thoughts in you about the rest of the chapter as well, and I look forward to this Holy Week and the last steps of Jesus towards the cross and the joyful good news of new life which comes at Easter. I'll see you in church this week, everyone.